are going to get started with our Mind, Body, and Soul panel, a holistic approach to employee engagement. My name is Dr. Emily Anhalt. I am a psychologist and emotional fitness consultant in the tech world, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel of distinguished individuals who are redefining what valuable employee engagement looks like. So you have extended bios in the app, but just to briefly introduce these wonderful humans. To my left, we have Nicole Cargoza, who is the founder of Yoga Foster. Taras Polischuk, COO at Sweatcoin and partner at Talent Equity Ventures. Isa Watson, founder and CEO of Envested. Wendy Werve, head of global marketing for Virgin Pulse. And finally, Stacie Mallen, Chief People Officer at CampusLogic. So today we're talking about the future of work and education around holistic employee engagement. And so much has changed in this sector in the last decade. I like to compare it to the world of design. If you think about design, a decade ago, it was something that was sort of added into a product or a company late in the game. It was almost an afterthought. And over time, it became really clear that design is something that contributes greatly to the success of a product, and that design problems are much easier to prevent than to fix. It wasn't really, though, until design began to be quantified, the benefits of design began to be quantified, that it was prioritized. And now it's not uncommon to see design co-founders and CDOs. It's valued in a whole new way. So I think it's becoming increasingly clear that the same is happening with employee engagement, culture, and wellness. That culture is a key factor not only in a person's decision about which company to work for, but also in terms of the quality of work they can do once they're there. So now I think companies are starting to realize it's imperative to take engagement and culture into consideration from the beginning and to prioritize it right away. What I'd like to start with today is to take a look backward and ask these wonderful panelists, what was your experience of employee engagement 5 to 10 years ago, whether you were an employee or an employer at the time? Anyone can start.
I'm happy to start.
Please.
So I think I'm on the other side of 40. So I would say my experience as an employee with regards to engagement really centered on not much of a social contract between employer and employee. The contract was really about you show up and I pay you, and that's our agreement. And what you do outside and how you take care of yourself beyond that, beyond the benefits I provide you, is up to you. And I've happily seen a very nice shift away from that in favor of organizations recognizing that it's absolutely foundational to have people who are healthy and happy coming to work every day. And the focus on engagement really has started to pivot to how can we bring you into the culture? How can we get you to help shape the culture instead of just show up and work for us?
I can echo that. 5 to 10 years ago, I was in a senior role on Wall Street, and before that, I was a diabetes chemist in pharma, so 2 very different things. But the one thing I can echo is that, yes, it was kind of show up, do your job, we'll pay you. That social contract wasn't quite there. But I think that if you look at holistic employee engagement, there are different components to that. And the first component that people were comfortable jumping on was the health side. So, at JP Morgan Chase, they launched like an initiative to help people stop smoking, or if you lost a certain amount of weight, you got like a certain amount of health credits and things like that. And so I've seen that transcend a number of organizations, and I think that we're just now getting to the place where kind of that mentally emotional component is part of the conversation.
Yeah, I'll probably add to that. I'd like to touch upon an issue that is kind of adjacent to employee engagement, that is performance management. I think 5 to 7 years ago, the way performance management was done in companies was completely different. So you all probably remember this semi-annual or annual performance reviews that the entire team had to go through. I think now most companies are ditching that practice and going towards more like continuous feedback and continuous performance management at that time.
And I'll say I started wellness programming about 20 years ago, and alongside of that, really started looking at employee satisfaction probably about the same time. So really been through the whole evolution to where we are today. And 5 to 10 years ago, everyone was very metrics focused, carrier focused, looking at doing biometric screening as a first pass, which I feel like is going on a first date with someone that you really want to trust and asking them, you know, how much do you weigh? So it's probably not the best way to evolve trust within an organization. That's just my opinion. So we started there, and I think what happened with that is that we got away from looking at the fact that culture is how it feels when you walk into an organization. And so how does that feel to people? There was a huge disassociation between a wellness program being about the dollars and cents and almost being paternalistic in some ways, and less about the emotional health of the employee and how it felt when they walked through the door. Do they feel like their employer cares about them and their family? And so my hope is we're evolving. We've been talking about this for a long time, and I think that's why we're here today. We're evolving to a place where it is about how it feels to people, and providing them those choices so that they can make the best decisions for themselves, but at the same time, going more towards what we use, which is now an employee net promoter score, which is more of a direct reflection of how it feels versus engagement or satisfaction, which is really about how people feel about their leader and their role. ENPS is how it feels as it relates to the alignment to the organization. So from a metrics and a big picture standpoint, I think that's kind of the evolution to where we are today.
That makes a lot of sense. And in talking about where we are today, what would you say does it mean for a company to be truly holistic in terms of their culture and engagement? What aspects of wellness need to be considered for a company to be considering themselves as a holistic approach to their culture and engagement?
I'll just start as the employer up here. I think it starts with developing a foundational philosophy of what you are going to do to talk about wellness in your organization. So you have to start with the basics, which is what do we believe philosophically is our role with well-being for our employee base? Some organizations, you know, you look at big companies like in pharma, I was in pharma too, they tend to migrate to a more paternalistic, more almost controlling perspective on well-being. At CampusLogic, we believe it's about choice and offering choice and options and opportunities to people so they can make their own decision and path as they go, and for themselves and for their families as well. So we try to look holistically throughout the family of the individual and reach there, but also look at, you know, emotional health, stress reduction, physical, mental, right, all the overall aspects. And then those individuals can choose their path. What is important to them? What's going to make the biggest difference to them personally and their families for where they are today? And that's different for every single person. And our role is to offer those options and opportunities.
And I think that you also have to consider the generational shift that's happening in the workforce. So by 2020, 50% of the workforce will be millennials, so people born from 1980 to about 2000. And when you think about their needs, our needs, they're different than my parents, who are boomers. You know, my dad immigrated to the US, was a computer engineer, my mom was in pharma. They just went to work every day, and I was like, do you like it? Do you love it? I don't know. But that whole notion of being connected to people, when you think about our habits, we're digital natives. We were the first people to jump on like MySpace and Facebook and all these things that took others a while to adapt to. And so I think that this whole notion of connectedness is something that has to factor into the equation when we think about wellness for people at work. And specifically, how do you build relationships with people? And you know, the reason that's such a greater need now than it was 20 years ago is that 20 years ago, people were very content with going into that one job after they graduated from college and growing up in the ranks of that job for their entire career and retiring with a good pension. That is not the case today. People want mobility options across the organization. So if I come in through engineering, can I get to like marketing analytics, or can I get to other things? I started my career as a diabetes chemist at Pfizer. Then I was the first data scientist for the drug Lyrica, and then I went to MIT for business school and then worked for Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase. So that just alone kind of is indicative of, you know, career mobility. And so giving people the right tools and infrastructure so that they can actually build relationships across, because the relationships across is what actually is the facilitator of those mobility options. And I think that this whole, do I have a friend at work, and the feeling of loneliness in the workplace, that all ties into how connected do you feel.
Isa, would you? Oh, I'm sorry. Before we keep going, I'm just curious if, Isa, you could expand a little bit on how that might happen. How can employees build relationships with other people in the company, especially across affinity groups?
Yes, so I think that there are a few ways. I think traditionally, relationships have been built kind of in affinity groups. If we're talking about affinity groups and their kind of, traditional sense, we're talking about the African American group, the Latino group, the women's group, things like that. That was generally a place where people were building relationships, where people who generally weren't kind of part of the old guys club had access to other parts of the organization. The thing and this is maybe not the most popular view, I think that the ERG, Employee Resource Group / Affinity Group model, is a little outdated. I think that it's more, along with interests. So our platform at Envested, we're a software technology company that developed a workplace engagement tool for this purpose. So we have a network development algorithm that recommends events and activities to you on the basis of getting you to broaden your network. The reality is, when we think about some of the groups on the platform, and our customers are companies like Walmart.com and Jet and Vivo, you have like the Vivo Vegans group, the Vivo Young Moms group. Tell me, how do you say your name again? Terrace. So Terrace and I would never be in the same affinity group. But maybe he could be like a big sponsor of mine. And the reality is that, my mobility was, I had a lot of white male sponsors. And so you think about how to build that relationship. I think that, incorporating technology is one aspect to that, but I also think it's just smart and consistent programming, even if you don't have technology. I think that, there are ways to kind of incentivize coffee with, a different person in a different department, and like incorporate that into performance reviews, or kind of your OKRs and things of that nature. So I think it's in the absence of technology, I think that's the ideal, but I think that there's smart, consistent programming that you can have.
And I would say the same. So we're a technology platform as well, and we view technology as a way to help scale culture. So whatever those programs are that you're building, how do you scale them across your organization? And just back on the notion of social, I think what we found, and piggybacking on yours, is most organizations start with Wellness 1.0 when they're bringing wellness into their organizations, and that's really about finding the sick people in your organization and trying to steer them towards programs that are designed for them. But what we see is the whole organization benefits when you get them socially involved. So what we're also seeing is that you have to do it at onboarding. When you onboard a new employee, give them that tool right away, get them involved in a challenge, a corporate challenge, get them meeting people, put them in with older employees, similar employees, dissimilar employees, get them really feeling like they're part of the culture. We've seen that having much more of an impact on the sick people in the organization than targeting the sick people with the programs that are designed for them.
Wendy, I know Virgin Pulse has gathered an immense amount of data, specifically around employee engagement. So I'm curious, how do organizations create cultures of well-being? How does that link to stronger business performance?
Sure. So we've been in business about 13 years, and actually just last week we unveiled a study that we've been doing with Human Capital Management Institute, quantifying some of the benefits of well-being programs and wellness programs within organizations and how they impact engagement. And it's tough because there's not really a causal relationship. There's a lot of correlation. But what we're seeing is that organizations that invest in well-being at the foundational level and holistic well-being. This is about including everybody. This is about offering, financial wellness programs, mental wellness programs, not just physical wellness programs. They're seeing lower attrition rates, substantially lower attrition rates. They're seeing, the study that we just received the results from showed a $7,700 productivity per full-time employee across the folks who are investing in wellness programs. That number goes up to $8,300 per full-time employee if you have more than 30% of your organization involved in that program. So we're really looking at what are those metrics that we can tie to participation in well-being programs. And the key is then getting people engaged in those programs. How do you get them to participate so that you're getting those really strong business results?
I also wanted to add really quickly, Greenhouse Software led a study recently on the employee lifetime value. And they looked at 4 particular points across an employee journey, starting with onboarding, which is actually incredibly critical. And they took comparisons between a company that had normal engagement practices and a company that had slightly above average engagement practices. And for the slightly above average engagement practices, a salesperson in that organization made $2.5 million more in revenue to the company. And so I think that we talk about a lot is like the metrics and the costs. And I think that studies are starting to show that there's also a revenue cost to it as well. And one of the hardest things about this whole topic is the ROI conversation. What's the business case? How do I communicate that? And that was just something I wanted to add from the ELTV study.
Speaking of that, that feels important that there is a huge ROI. I'm curious, Nicole, from your perspective, we know that stress and burnout affect employees, teachers, leaders negatively, but there's also a huge cost to the system. So I'm curious what you've found to be the long-term ROI of wellness.
Yeah, and working with schools is quite interesting because the biggest ROI is the educational excellence of the children. So it's a shift from thinking about how much money we're going to generate, but how are we actually equipping this next generation in the best way? And teacher stress and burnout is usually the predominant reason why you see over time kids having a less likelihood of succeeding as compared to other schools within that district. So there's a huge ROI when we think about investing in teacher wellness and teacher self-care, but it's oftentimes one of the last things that a school has the capacity to be able to fulfill. So for us, it's critical. I think that we could see some of the greatest shifts in education in America if we do invest in teacher wellness from the get-go, and especially in those critical moments when they join a school for the first time. We found that the connectivity of teachers, not just within that school, but with other teachers that are familiar to them, whether they teach the same grade or the same type of students, is key. So agreeing with you when it comes to building this digital community, it's really important because teachers oftentimes don't have the time to be able to leave the confines of their school, right?
Well, I think we can promote these kinds of practices in a number of ways. One of the things I want to touch on is technology, but maybe before we get there, I'm also curious, how do we encourage employees to create their own practices? How do we advocate for their own agency, that they have some control in what it looks like and to be able to ask for what they need? Anyone who feels?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that has always been a big topic of debate, right, is how prescriptive do you get with people? And I've taught fitness for 20 years, and if somebody walks into my spin class, they showed up to take spin class, right? They showed up to knowing they're going to exercise. People do not come into the workplace to be told what to do related to their physical fitness. It's not an expectation they have, and in fact, it can really violate the trust that they have with their employer to be too prescriptive. So I think giving people, talking about wellness, and I think this is why it's so hard to measure, because it really needs to be integrated into every conversation and culture. So let me give some really specific tactical level examples, because I think without those it's hard to kind of grasp this. So at one organization, for example, we as an organization decided we were going to stop ordering dessert every time we catered lunch. It seems like such a little thing, right? But it happens all the time. We're a wellness company, but we give everybody cookies every single time we provide lunch. So that's a really minor example, a tactical level example, but that's where it becomes a cultural conversation as to the food that we order for our employees. We try to make healthier choices, that we do walking meetings. You guys have seen all of these things, but it's providing access and opportunity for people to opt in. Standing desks, right? So opting into standing desks, but having some skin in the game. We have wellness dollars. We ultimately offer the most flexibility because we give a wellness reimbursement to employees, and they can use that to buy a pillow to sleep better at night, or they can take a class with it. So it can really be used in a wide variety of ways to give people that flexibility. And again, I go back to putting options in front of them to do that, kind of migrate in baby steps. I think when we start programming, the other thing, we were talking about this before, And you see this in health and fitness as well as in workplace wellness. People try to, you said boil the ocean, right? So I'm gonna get up tomorrow and I'm gonna go for a run and then I'm gonna have a smoothie, right? It's like I'm gonna do everything tomorrow. And I think the same thing applies in workplace wellness. We try to get people to really baby steps. So one thing that we do is do a water challenge. We're in Phoenix, Arizona. If you don't hydrate, you die. So it's one good place to start. So we do a water challenge for people because how hard is it to ask people to just drink a little bit more water, right? And it feels very easy to them. It feels, they can feel accomplished. They can feel like they get involved. They start getting connected with people. Hey, let me go fill up your bottle. I'm gonna fill. It seems so simple, but those are the things that I have found over 20 years of kind of launching programs and doing programming overall. That's what puts people with the viewpoint that this is a positive thing that creates connectedness versus starting with something that feels a little bit too in their bubble, quite frankly. I think you have to be careful walking that line as an employer. So it's encouragement and options is the kind of the standard that we utilize.
I just want to echo your points on baby steps. I actually think that's very important because one of the reasons that I believe people aren't healthy and they don't really want to be healthy is because of a human behavioral bug that is called present bias. So it's really hard for humans to do something now that has a very long-term effect. Like you run now and you get healthier in half a year from now or in 2 years, etc. And the answer and the cure to present bias is basically instant gratification. And sometimes there can be a third party, like an employer, to provide this instant gratifications for the good things, like doing a morning run or doing something positive or not eating dessert today, etc. So you as an employer can become that third party to provide that to basically cure that human bug that we all have.
And I think habit, we were talking about too, sorry. Habits is, if you've ever read The Power of Habit, which is a great book if you're gonna launch a well-being program to understand what creates healthy habits. But it's connecting the habit to how it feels. So there is an element, I don't wanna forget to mention this, of reflection. So getting people to connect what they did with how they felt, that's what creates habits and creates repeatable healthy habits for people.
And being successful in the practice of those habits.
Right.
Repeated success is what will keep people coming back.
Yeah, so that's a point, an important kind of psychological thing as you build programming to make sure that there's some kind of reflection point along the way so that people can connect, oh yeah, I feel better because here is what I'm doing. And in the absence of that, people can attribute it to lots of other things and not to the change in habit.
The only other thing I wanted to add was just, making sure you actually have a culture of openness. I think it's easy to recommend and empower people who naturally feel empowered. Yeah. And with, increasing diversity, whether it be racial, gender, sexual orientation, or, country of origin, there's so many different, ways that wellness looks like to us in our cultures. Like, I'm actually Caribbean, so I'm from St. Kitts, and I spend a lot of my time in the US, most of my employees don't look like me, right? And most of them have wellness in their own language. And so I think that, there was that, and I'm cognizant of that, but I had to make sure that they knew, like, hey, let's all come to the table and embrace, like, the fact that we're different in super cool ways, and let's put ideas on the table. And I think that that's actually super important. I think that people in the majority they don't think about it at the forefront because they kind of take for granted that most of the people look like them, and most people may have opinions that are similar to theirs. So I think that's one thing that I would just kind of add to that.
Absolutely. And you can actually make people feel the opposite about being well by putting them in a position where they feel like they're not welcome in spaces of wellness. Most of wellness in America is a very exclusive, very white space. And so if you try to do something with a more diverse group, introducing everybody to a yoga class, for example, can actually have a negative effect if you don't feel comfortable walking into yoga spaces, right? Because it's not really designed for me, for example. So I think that's really important. So a lot of times wellness can look quite different for different types of people and really diversify the landscape and not just talking about, okay, am I working out? Are we doing a running program? But are we talking about financial wellness? Are we taking care of my families at home? Do I have space to be able to be thinking about wellness in the context of my everyday?
And that's really important. We found we're a global organization, and well-being is so different globally. The priorities for well-being programs vary from continent to continent, and we have to be very cognizant of those cultural nuances and being very sensitive to all of the needs of those organizations. I think the biggest difference we've seen is, in the US, there's a big push on your insurance carriers and solving health challenges with drugs and medication. That's very different globally, incentivizing people to take care of themselves with wellness dollars and things like that. That's not a global phenomenon. That's very unique to the US. So when we think globally, we really have to think, how do we truly engage people in the ways that they need to be engaged in their cultures, in their languages, with their customs? And that's been a huge learning for us.
Yeah, I think there's actually been some studies on specific to food. It's funny, but just in the US alone, there's actually a difference in wellness penetration on food-related programs based on where people are, where they come from, where their country of origin is, on their emotional connectedness to food. And there's been a lot of evidence around the fact that that is like one of the worst places to start talking about well-being because there is a significant emotional connectedness depending on all of that diversity that you have in your organization related to food. It's fascinating to think about that. I'm from Indiana, and I like certain things, and other people in the South, right, they like certain things. So when you really think about it, it's not that surprising. But when you really take that to country of origin, right, then it becomes really entrenched culturally as to even talking about what they should or should not be eating can get very emotionally connected for them.
Well, to that end, what have you found are the wants and needs of a modern candidate? It sounds like they vary so widely. How can a company cast a wide net and yet still let there be enough depth that people feel they're actually being reached by things? Maybe I'll start with Wendy, since I know that your company has gathered so much data around this.
Sure, we have. And we do see more and more that employees looking to join companies, that is one of the things that they're interested in. Beyond the benefits program is, how are you going to support me? How are you going to support my health and well-being? And I think what we've really found is you have to your point a little earlier, you have to give them a personalized experience. You really have to get employees to opt in. What are the habits they want to change? Not what are the habits you want them to change. But get them to opt in, give them the information about areas. I mean, you could take an HRA, which might expose some areas or some health risk areas that folks might want to focus on, but don't push them to focus on those areas. Let them opt in, give them opportunities to opt in, push them information if they want it, and it's a gradual, I think, I'm going to, Terrace? Okay. It is a gradual. You have to look at the long term, but we're really seeing that it is no longer a nice to have within organizations to have well-being as part of your culture. It really is becoming much more important for organizations, especially global organizations.
And also to add to that and to answer your question, I think the main thing that candidates are looking for and employees as well is transparency. So like one of the most popular things that is happening to the recruitment tech world right now is a portal called The Muse. It's a portal where employers can basically create a landing page of their own with content about their workplace. So how does it feel to work in this company, testimonials from employees, insights into company culture, photos of company's office, of company's lunches, etc. So a whole overview and kind of an opportunity to take a look inside the company. And I think that's what candidates really need. They want to understand what is it really like to work in this organization.
And another thing too, so I've already touched on the whole topic of mobility. They want to know they're not going to be stuck. But one of the things, we've talked about all these amazing like wellness tactics and strategies, but one of the things that the companies have to also do is make sure that they're training their managers, that they have the right learning and development materials and cadence so that the people who are managing these new employees are equipped to have conversations, are equipped to make sure that they're delivering those personalized experiences. The Chief People Officer of Credit Karma is actually on our advisory board, and that's, we actually just read an article together on, the number of managers is exceeding the number of leaders in organizations, and one of those differentiators is on the leader side, the ability to take risks, but also like how do you kind of bring the people with you? And a lot of the things that we've talked about today kind of feed into that. But the one last thing I wanted to add that we haven't yet addressed is that on this community impact side of things. So the Case Foundation does amazing research, and they did a study, Steve Case, who's co-founder AOL, they did a study that showed 68% of candidates in their interview asked the question around, an employer's programs with like volunteering and giving. And when we think about, like, again, not to pick on my parents because they're great people, but like, they were, always just giving to the United Way, and that was like the way of the life, like back, when they were working. And, this whole, how do I donate my skills, my expertise? That's actually wellness to some people. And I just think that that's actually an increasing, studies show that it's actually an increasing part of why, employees select a company.
Yeah, and there's actually technology platforms to do that. Like, I've recently spoken to a very interesting startup that is called Carry Club. So basically what they do is they provide like an internal marketplace for the company, for the employees to choose what kind of donations do they want to make or charitable cases that they want to support. And it's one of the benefits that the employer provides to them and kind of funds these activities.
That's a good shout out. Their founder is one of my friends.
Well, and to that point, we see people who use our platform using their wellness dollars increasingly and more across the younger folks within an organization. They don't want to take that, $100 they got for doing their HRA. They're, great, they did it. Most of them want to donate that. So we make it very easy for them to donate it within the app, but we're seeing that more and more, which was also surprising to us because back in the day, it was, hey, how do I maximize my points to get my HRA dollars as quickly as I can? But we're just seeing a much more altruistic, generation coming out.
Yeah, we, at my last employer, we actually had a program where we partnered with, some of you partner with, which is Stacie Tanner. We created a program where for every point they received, we would match dollar for dollar that point to a charity of their choice. And then they could donate the whole, or they could take half and donate half. And I think that actually created more buy-in than anything else that we did.
Yep.
I think that one change to our program probably created, I think it was somewhere around a 20% increase in participation due to that program. And I was going to say, from a culture standpoint, I think one thing that we haven't talked about is values and purpose of an organization. I think whatever you do, it has to feel authentic to the people that work for you, that work with you, that do all the heavy lifting to get your company where you want it to go. And that is, if you don't come across as authentic by aligning your values and your purpose to well-being and to what it means to them and what it means to their family. Really interesting company up in, the largest employer in Maine is a pharma company for pets, for veterinary care. And they have an incredible well-being program in the middle of nowhere in Maine. And they actually made a change to their program where forever they could not have a bring your animal to work because they're a pharma company and they have a clean room environment. So they actually created a separate doggy daycare off on campus, but so they solved the problem that it's not in the building. It makes sense, right? When you think about people go work for a veterinary health company, they're probably animal lovers. That's probably part of what drives them purposely, and they attract people across the globe to work at this company. So when they created that benefit and people could go literally have lunch with their dog, it was something like a 30% impact to their overall engagement and net promoter score over a period of a year. That one program, which yes, costs them money, but you have to align it. So what I'm saying is that very closely aligns to what they do. So you have to think about how your values and purpose align to what you are doing in well-being, what your outreach strategy is, how you're engaging with employees through those programs, how you're communicating about those programs. That should really all align to your purpose and values. Otherwise, it's going to feel completely disconnected. And I'm not throwing carriers under the bus. So if you let your carriers do that communication, to me, that's a massive missed opportunity for you to reflect and communicate directly to employees about your values and your organizational purpose.
And on the other end of the spectrum as well, as a nonprofit that gets a significant amount of funding from corporate initiatives around wellness, to be able to see an entire community so invested in a common goal, it really does like raise all boats, lift all tides, whatever that saying is, because now we have schools that are invested in their own comprehensive wellness programs that doesn't just affect the teachers, but the students and the families that are going to that school, supported by another organization that's doing that same work, and together they can watch both of them grow. So I think that's really important when we think about investing in wellness beyond the walls of our companies that we're working on, and making it a really cohesive part of the communities that we serve.
So I really love that this panel has focused a lot on altruism and the sort of beautiful and profound aspects of things. And I think it's an important ingredient to add to the conversation about why it serves a company. Ultimately, we touched barely on ROI, but I recently watched an interview between Kara Swisher and Apple CEO Tim Cook on MSNBC. And Tim Cook stated that right now there are 500,000 software jobs that are not able to be filled because people don't have the skills, and that number is projected to go up to 2 million over the next 3 or 4 years. So there's this huge skills gap, which means it's going to become increasingly competitive for companies to hire top talent as it's becoming more and more of an employee market. So my question for all of you is, how do companies stay competitive in the hiring process around wellness and engagement? How can they leverage wellness as an advantage?
So I'll take that one. So the software that we offer is really a hub for other programs, and what we're finding is, I think to that point, and we started, as a hub for health and wellness programs and other benefits your organization may offer as part of your overall benefits package. But we've started bringing in more and more programs that appeal to all sorts of different types of employees and audiences. It could be, financial well-being. We partner with a company called Will to bring in mindfulness and resilience. We partner with PeerFit. Our whole goal is, how do we best help our client organizations deliver the most personalized experiences they can to accommodate their members, their employees, and how can they continue to make their members successful? And what we found is the more programs that you can offer and personalize and allow people to participate in that they feel are designed for their success and to make them successful, the more competitive those companies are. And we're actually seeing that the more progressive companies are also the companies that perform better from the stock market, the S&P perspective. They're the ones that are investing the most in bringing these programs, because there are so many amazing programs out there. It's just a matter of helping people figure out how to curate the ones that are going to help them the most.
Another thing I'll add is that your employees are your biggest sales. They're your strongest salespeople. And so, it's very much been the recruiting process and the, just attracting applicants has been mostly from kind of a recruiter's perspective. And I've seen increasingly more and more, companies equipping their employees with, the ability to talk about some of the things that may be important to a specific candidate. One of the things that we look for in resumes when we're growing, and it's kind of daunting, but we're like doubling every 6 months in size, is what are those other things on the resume that, may indicate, are they into yoga? Are they into, part of their communities that I just don't know about, but I know some of my other employees are equipped. And I think that, companies can start to think a little bit outside the box with equipping your employees and engaging existing happy employees in the, because they're great curators, actually, of the things going on.
Yeah, what we talk about now instead of employment branding is employee voice. With social media has been part of the picture now for a long time, and we think about it related to consumer branding. But the reality is that there is no more sitting in a room with a marketing agency and creating an employment brand that's completely disconnected from experience. That can't happen anymore. There are companies still doing it. I don't know how well that's going for them, but it's not really reflecting the voice of the employees. So to your point, you have to really tap into that voice and understand what people are talking about. And that is your representation of your brand at this point, is your voice. And part of that voice should be, and I think there are a lot of companies out there that do amazing things, and then they don't translate that over to their employment branding. So it's, again, kind of a missed opportunity. It's like, doing all the work and getting no credit, right? That they are not tapping into the workforce to talk about what's happening and then utilizing that to attract new talent. And that is, what we feel like is the new face of recruitment brand, which is just a pure reflection of that voice. And it can be as simple as a social media strategy, right? Something that's very simple to utilize and leverage either through LinkedIn, which is a very traditional source, or through Facebook and Instagram, which is more visual, obviously, to reflect what the experience is actually for employees inside the organization, which is the best sales pitch you can make to anybody that's looking for a new opportunity.
I think something we'll see too with a lot of the younger millennials entering the workforce or whatever comes after millennials is thinking not just about wellness on an individual level, but on a collective level. And we haven't really talked about like the political or social justice or activism aspects of wellness. But I think a lot of wellness programs currently are kind of symptom-oriented instead of systems-oriented. And that's going to be incredibly important in the future, is how well a company can not only provide wellness to the employees, but is standing up for wellness in the spaces that they work in, whether it's the industry or the country or globally, how they position themselves. And so I think that's going to be really key moving forward, is how we think about collective wellness and what impact we have outside of our companies.
To that end, how does social well-being, how do you incorporate it, and how does it drive engagement?
We do a lot of company challenges, and we see massive engagement. We actually, one of the programs a lot of organizations participate in is the Global Challenge. It's a 100-day trip around the world that you participate in teams of 7 against other organizations. So about 300,000 people participate in this, and we do a pre and post survey where we're trying to gauge the engagement and the satisfaction levels, and it's amazing. During that 100 days, the engagement, we have the baseline engagement score, but by the end of it, that score is so much higher that the struggle organizations have is, how do I harness that momentum that I've just built and feed it back into the organization to continue to drive that engagement? And that's a purely social, 100% involving everybody. Employees are encouraged to team up with people that they don't know. Create a team of your, I'm in marketing. Get your marketing team in the UK teamed up with your marketing team in Australia who don't see each other very often. And you get this great competitive spirit that drives amazing momentum that is, I think, organizations looking to harness that and who are able to harness that see sustained engagement over time.
And from a more decentralized approach, I think the ability to have a social connection is really based on some commonality. You and I think alike, or we both went to MIT, or you and I don't know, love to travel, whatever the case is. But how do you find those people that you have things in common with? And I think that's actually one of the bigger barriers generally in a workforce to social engagement. And so one of the things that we've seen through our technology is that ends up being a catalyst for all sorts of relationship building. We actually do also have in the software, the companies, we see challenges on the kind of volunteering and giving, and other side, engineering is having bug bashes, whatever the case is. And so again, even if you don't have technology to support that, how do you create a platform or some type of programming where people are finding others that they have things in common with? And I think that actually drives a lot of the social engagement. I can tell you that in our class of software, employee adoption is generally 9% on average. Our weekly to monthly average is in excess of 50%. And so when you think about, that wasn't different on purpose. It was really different because of that one thing, like the ability to kind of find people that you have things in common with, build those relationships, and make an impact on the workplace. But I think the commonalities is a big barrier.
And I think it goes, you touched on this earlier, but at a very deep level, I believe that connectedness throughout organization is what's going to could solve a lot of the issues that we have related to the discrimination factor within organizations. I think if you see people and you get to know people as human beings and their families and how you're connected, and those connections are created across organizations more organically, and you have a diverse population, ultimately, then someone has someone to go to. That person has someone to talk to. That person has somebody that can go and advocate for them. And I think what's happened is in organizations, people have been taught that they have to be someone at work and someone at home. And I think if you read the book we're reading right now at CampusLogic, we're reading Radical Candor. And one of the premises behind Radical Candor is to care deeply and to really to divorce the idea that you have to be somebody else while you're at work. Because if you really get to know human beings on a human level, that is a much deeper connection. And then I think ultimately if we're looking to solve for the bigger issues that we're seeing, all over the place, unfortunately, that are becoming more public, these have been going on for a long time, but it's bubbling to the surface, is that connectedness will make those things really, it won't abate them completely, but I think it will give people a voice and an option, an opportunity that they have not had historically. And I think that's really, that's another reason why this is so important to talk about.
And to add to that, actually, apart from the wellness and overall happiness, benefits, they also provide very practical business benefits, like better knowledge management. Because if your employees know each other really well, they talk to each other, you have better knowledgement and kind of succession in the organization, because you know who has the skills that you need to solve your next challenge in your company. So there are very practical benefits that connectedness has that are related and can be tracked directly to business.
And it'll shine onto your customers in schools. It'll affect how your students show up in the classroom every day. It's so important to be thinking about this from the center, because it'll radiate outwards and it's going to make an effect one way or the other, and it might as well be making the best one that it can.
Well, that's a perfect segue. With our last few minutes, I'd love to shine a light on the future. So what would you say is the landscape of the future of wellness culture? 5 to 10 years from now, what will be standard practice then that's just starting to be considered now? What's something important that every company should perhaps consider implementing immediately to improve holistic employee engagement, whether it's the use of technology or some other initiative? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the use of technology is really important, and really because if you think about employee engagement, it really started with, it was maybe half of one person's job, then it became a person's job, then it became maybe two people's jobs, but then there's a lot of turnover. And so one of the things that we've seen is that when companies implement wellness programs and it's just really been assigned to those two people or that small team, what happens is that the whole wellness initiative goes and you have to start from scratch. We've actually seen that happen in a lot of organizations. So I think that technology, not only to just empower it, but to measure it. It gives you a lot of data about how to actually drive strategies and what the best strategies are for your particular workplace, because what works for your company may not work for your company and vice versa. And I think that is super important. And to your point about those values and kind of owning who you are as a company, it kind of all feeds into that. So I do think that the use of technology to scale and make it consistent over time is really important.
I think what I just said, my thesis is around connectedness specifically, and that I think organizations are going to start measuring more and more the amount of complex connectedness within organizations across geographies, if you're a global organization, or even within a small organization across departments and silos, right? And across levels, et cetera. So I think for me, the evolution has to be around, again, this connectedness and being personal at work, and leaving behind what historically our parents, I believe I'm probably older than you, so, and even early in my career, we were told to show up differently. And I think this generation, and for sure my kids, whatever they are, Gen Z or whatever they are, I have a millennial too, they're not going to do that. They are who they are. And I think we've got to change the perspective, which I think will solve a lot of big problems.
And I think you started out this panel talking about design. I think really continuing to create and design experiences that people want to engage in, that make people feel successful, that are designed for them, and move away from more of the transactional sort of HR approaches that we've seen over the past, 20, 30 years. I think we're going to see a real shift to that people side of the business that, in my experience, I've been in HR for 15 years now. The wellness piece has really been kind of an add-on, like an afterthought. I think it becomes absolutely mission critical and more the umbrella under which HR strategy is plugged in.
Yeah, and I would say even broader than that too. I think wellness is a part of performance management, it's a part of retention, it's a part of diversity and inclusion. You really have to think about how wellness is integrated into every aspect of how your business is engaging with customers and clients and your employees.
Yep. And one quick tactical thing is that if you don't have like a full-time employees focus on this, start a culture committee and give them just a little budget. And I think that with some guidelines will give you a lot of information over a year.
Anything you want to add, Karis?
Good.
All right, thank you all so much. We appreciate you being here. Thank you to our amazing panelists.